Good morning, everyone. I guess we kind of filtered over to that side. That's okay. Last week we had everybody kind of over here for the camera. Good morning. Let us first say good morning and give a warm welcome to those on Zoom. Are they there? Can they see us? Who's that? Oh. There they are. There they are. Hi. Okay. I am Susie Lockwood on my stool here, and I will be your service leader this morning. Our guest speaker is one of our favorites. It's Reverend Janet Onnie, who will be coming to us by pre-recorded video. We will begin this morning, as always, with our announcements. First, Zoom friends, please remain muted, and also everyone make sure your phones are off. Make sure you check out all the many group activities going on here at UUCLC in the weekly bulletin. And if you're interested in receiving the bulletin or the monthly newsletter called The Communicator, or to learn more about us, you may email us at office@uuclc.org. Okay, we have a few announcements here. The first is announcement about announcements. We are going to have a volunteer opportunity every week. We try to give our time, our talents, and our treasure. There are many talents among us in this room, and we have many volunteer opportunities available for you to share your time and talents. So you can help us to live our principles and help build our beloved community. This week, we're seeking members for the Care and Connect Committee, one of my favorite heartfelt committees. These folks organize and help fellow members who are not able to attend church right now, and for any one of us who are in a need for care and you need to connect. So this is for all the congregation, and it warms my heart that we can help take care of each other during times that we need each other. If this sounds like something you could help organize, please contact Janine Reagan to see how you can be of assistance. It could be phone calls, it could be cards, lots of opportunities. Also, oh gosh, my paper's fall. We have an announcement from the membership committee. Our membership committee offers Orientation 1 class for anyone who would like to learn about Unitarian Universalism and or UUCLC. If you're interested in attending, please sign up on the sheet just outside the sanctuary on the table. When we have 4 or 5 on the sheet, a class will be scheduled and you'll be notified. And we now have envelopes, I was going to say it later, envelopes for your donation by the lockbox. Please put your name on it if you intend to drop something in the box, so you can get part of the contribution statement for your taxes at the end of the year. Okay, does anybody have any other announcement? Today is the last day to get the Christy Side with Love yellow t-shirt to show who we are. And like I said last week, like on CNN in the past, when there has been protests or marches, all over the country, I can always see the yellow T-shirt of the UUCLC, and it also, not UUCLC, but UUs across the country. And it also helps money for the causes. Does anybody have any other announcements this morning? Janet will now have the opening words.
We gather today as people aware of the instability of our institutions. We are angered by those using religion to justify cruel and divisive laws. We gather unsure of how to respond to those who would sow chaos in our civic lives. We gather to remind ourselves of our civic roots and the hopefulness of the grand experiment in governance of the people, by the people, for the people. We gather today determined to celebrate and preserve our democracy. We gather today as people aware. Clarissa Pinkola Estes writes, "One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. The light of the soul throws sparks, can send up flares, builds signal fires, causes proper matters to catch fire. To display the lantern of the soul in shadowy times like these, to be fierce and to show mercy toward others, both are acts of immense bravery and greatest necessity. May this flame we light remind us to bravely stand up and show our souls."
Okay, jumped ahead there. Welcome. Welcome again to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lake County. We gather as a community of seekers to honor the interdependence of life, to respect the dignity of all, and to honor the land that we are on. Let us acknowledge that we walk upon the traditional territories of the Tamukwe peoples, the original nation of this land. We are blessed with the space and opportunity to strive, to live our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion in our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to live out our dreams of a world community of peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. We are all welcome here. It is now time we welcome any first-time visitors. If you're with us for the first time or returning from a long absence, and are comfortable in doing so, give us a wave. And because we would like to welcome you here and invite you to sign in to our welcome visitors station outside of the narthex. Do we have any first-time visitors today? And that's okay. I see some new faces, but okay. Welcome you. Our chalice is lit, and we will now have the spirit of life. I want to hear singing. Beautiful.
Before we start this video, I want to briefly introduce you to Benjamin Rush, the only Universalist signer of the Declaration of Independence. Here is a letter he wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1800. I agree with you likewise in your wishes to keep religion and government independent of each other. Were it possible for St. Paul to rise from his grave at the present juncture, he would say to the clergy who are now so active in settling the political affairs of the world, cease from your political labors. Your kingdom is not of this world. Read my epistles. In no part of them will you perceive me aiming to depose a pagan emperor or to place a Christian upon a throne. Christianity disdains to receive support from human governments. From this, it derives its preeminence over all the religions that ever have or ever exist in the world. Human governments may receive support from Christianity, but it must be only from the love of justice and peace, which it is calculated to produce in the minds of men. By promoting these and all the other Christian virtues by your precepts and example, you will much sooner overthrow errors of all kinds and establish our pure and holy religion in the world than by aiming to produce by your preaching or pamphlets any change in the political state of mankind.
Now let us watch this story of Benjamin Rush, the most important founding author.
Expectation, every action's an creation. I'm laughing in the face of casualties of sorrow. For the first time I'm thinking past tomorrow.
Gotta love that song. Lin-Manuel Miranda put his favorite founding father on the map with that Broadway hit. It was called Hamilton. We know all about it. But what about some of the lesser-known characters from the Revolutionary era? Well, the author of a new book argues that one in particular deserves to be remembered, a doctor and signer of the Declaration who championed progressive causes that remain topical today.
Benjamin Rush was, first of all, sort of the founding father that people haven't found yet.
But author Stephen Freed thinks it's high time America did, with good reason.
He had very quietly helped write the proclamation that set off the Boston Tea Party. He had written one of the first major abolition writings, and basically within 2 years of the Continental Congress coming to Philadelphia, he was in the Continental Congress, and he was signing the Declaration of Independence at the age of 30.
So this is the good Dr. Rush?
This is the good Dr. Rush.
Freed spent 5 years writing his biography, having at his disposal Rush's own autobiography and diaries, housed at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia.
He writes in about the year 1774, a certain Thomas Paine arrived in Philadelphia. So this is Rush beginning to tell the story of how he met Thomas Paine, who was just a local writer. They talked about writing about independence, which Rush considered to be a very dangerous thing, to even write the word independence. He actually decided that he would encourage Paine to write the pamphlet about independence that he had already started. When the pamphlet was done, Rush convinced him to call it Common Sense.
So all of this would have been served here at the tavern. The doctor dined here at City Tavern with his much more famous co-conspirators, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, even George Washington. So how pivotal would you say Dr. Rush was to the American Revolution?
I would say, first of all, that I think that everything he did is so far not really well understood. But I think that the key to the American Revolution is that all these people work together. People forget that when Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, Rush was writing the Declaration of Independence for Pennsylvania, and each state was declaring its own independence. So this was a group effort.
But he was one of the few signers of the Declaration who, in fact, rushed to the front lines.
What's wonderful is that he's there talking to Washington the night before they're about to cross the Delaware, and he writes about all this. So a lot of the way we know that Washington was holding a little slip of paper that said victory or death is because it's in Rush's journal.
After independence was won, Rush refocused his fight against slavery. How much of slavery impacted his legacy?
Well, interestingly so, he wrote one of the first of the Founding Father writings on slavery, against slavery. He owned a slave for about 10 years after the war. We have really no idea why. There's been speculation that he bought a slave because some abolitionists bought slaves to free them. I couldn't find enough evidence that that's why he did it to say that. The abolition movement kind of stopped during the war. It picked up again in the later 1780s. When it did, Rush freed his slave.
But for all of his influence, Rush hasn't found celebrity the way some other founding fathers have.
The first time I'm thinking past tomorrow.
Should Lin-Manuel have written Hamilton?
About Rush?
About Rush.
Absolutely. Rush was a much better, more interesting person than Hamilton. If he wants to come back to do Rush, Rush was so much a part of the founding of the founding of the Black Church in America that he could do Rush in gospel. I think Rush was a better person. I think if you asked Hamilton, he would have said Rush was a better person. Every person who comes to Rush says, why isn't this guy more famous? What I found out in looking at not only his writing, but what happened after he died, is that there was a concerted effort to keep what was most interesting about Rush from the public.
Why?
Well, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had written Rush some of the most incredibly personal letters they ever shared with any of them, hundreds of them. So Rush was kind of the founding father who knew too much. His legacy was sort of slowly quashed. Part of it is because Rush had an interestingly contentious relationship with George Washington. He didn't want his family to know that he and Washington had this thing.
What was that thing?
At the very lowest ebb of the war, in the early 1778, some of the generals were talking about whether Washington was making the right decisions in who he was deputizing as his generals. And he wrote an anonymous letter to Patrick Henry in which he mirrored some of these arguments. It's so exciting in a way because you think of it as like an email you shouldn't have sent. Because he actually sent Patrick Henry this letter in January. He asked him to burn it. He and Washington then kind of made up. And Patrick Henry sent the letter to Washington 2 months later. I don't know what it did to Washington, except it made him mad at Rush. And he remained upset with Rush about this through his life. These combination of things led the family to try to make sure that the most interesting things that Rush wrote, that people didn't see them.
Rush's true legacy thrives here.
This is the famous surgical amphitheater of Pennsylvania Hospital.
His passion was personal. His son John descended into mental illness after killing his best friend in a duel and was treated here for decades.
Late in his life, Rush wrote another public letter saying, these are the things we need to do to dramatically improve care for the mentally ill. So he brought the fact that John was there into the public, into the newspapers, because he was so intent on advocating for the rights of the mentally ill, for their diagnosis, for their dignity, and for a lack of discrimination against them.
For Stephen Freed, resurrecting the most significant founding father we've never heard of is more relevant now than ever.
There's a reason they use the phrase more perfect union. No one thought it was perfect. And part of what I love about Rush's writing, he's really trying to point out the things about America that are going to be hard. Racial prejudice, having science and religion live together, having liberty and good government live together. And so he wrote about these things in a way that I think is still thoughtful today and makes you realize that these issues are hardwired into the American experiment, which we are still in.
And you really got to think about this. He was a true accidental founding father because, you know, people don't realize that when the Declaration, the last stop was Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and the original guy who was supposed to sign it refused. It was too dangerous.
Yeah.
And so then Rush said, I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'm in for
And
Rush
that
the
ushered
Gospel.
him
I got to tell you, I'm reading this book. It's fascinating. It just he keeps being involved in more and more interesting things. When the yellow fever gripped Philadelphia, I think it was in the 1790s, he was one of the few doctors and stayed and treated people.
Stayed and treated people. Lost his sister.
Yep, amazing life
Amazing.
and fascinating book.
Our roots run deep. Now we make time for sharing our joys, concerns, sorrows, or to set an intention for the coming days. There are stones and sand in the front and in the rear of the sanctuary. You may now come forward to place a stone in the sand or stones to signify and represent your thoughts and prayers. You may begin. If there's anyone here who would like to share a joy or concern or sorrow, please raise your hand. And the microphone magically will appear.
I just want to share that I was so amazed learning about Mary McLeod Bethune, and that Florida is the first state to have a statuary hall of a Black person, let alone a Black woman. That was so powerful. And just being an activist, and she stood up. She had a school for Black children, and the client came and she stood in the doorway and stared him down. So it was just, I'm just proud that Florida did this.
Shock. Anyone else? Share joy, concern? If you have someone not mentioned to which you hold concern, you may speak their name aloud. Begin. Mark. Nathan. For those things named, and for all those too tender to speak, we hold them in the light of our compassion and the warmth of our community. Let us take a moment to settle into silence. Hear and feel your quiet breathing. Hear and feel the quiet of this room and this community of quiet people. As we sit in quiet, feel the life that stretches between us, that fills this room. Feel the opening of all windows of our being and full outstretching of our spirit as we reach outward to the life around us, beyond this room, throughout all of creation, for this life, for the freedom we have to share and pursue in our lives. We are all grateful. Let us now reaffirm who we are together. We recite our new congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and through service we live our principles. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This Unitarian Universalist congregation works at creating a beloved community among ourselves and the world. We share a dream of being a church for all peoples and beings, as well as a church of the earth. Please join us in supporting this dream as we ask for whatever financial support you can provide. You may donate by using the lockbox out in the narthex. And please make sure and remember to use the envelopes we have provided and write your name on the envelope so that you can get tax credit. Or, there we go, it's a little bigger. There's music. Now we have a hymn. Hymn number 170, and if you wish to find it in the gray hymnals, they're under your seats, or I believe we're going to have a video. You can follow along with words, and I think we should stand.
We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a peaceful, loving people. We are peaceful, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are peaceful, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. I just want to say, as you all travel back to your communities, to just take a moment right now to take the sound of this room into your heart, the look of your comrades, something that you learned, some emotion that you had. And when it gets discouraging and seems absolutely impossible, bring back this moment right here where you know that there were thousands and thousands of people who have worked with you over a lifetime to try to find what it means to be a peaceful person, what it means to be a person who works for justice, what it means to be someone who holds the weight of the horror and at the same time holds the weight of the spectacular beauty of what goes on this planet. And it is our job as conscientious people to be able to hold both parts and move forward with grace and dignity and courage, and you are a great example of that. We are a peaceful, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a peaceful, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. Thank you all so much.
Wow, that's great.
That was the great volunteer. She wrote a real hit.
She wrote that one? Yeah. We got a lot of history today. We know that one.
10 10 years ago, I followed a car with a bumper sticker that took me a while to understand. It read, "A village in Kenya is missing an idiot." And it had the Obama logo replace the O in idiot. I was shocked at the vitriol of the message, but even more shocking was that car filled with young people pulled into a church parking lot. I was tempted to pull in and ask them if they thought Jesus would drive around with such a cruel, never mind, incorrect statement about someone. Then I remembered that I had made one or two injudicious statements in my youth, a statement designed to denigrate whatever or whoever I thought was the cause of all my troubles. Would framing my question by asking, "What would Jesus do?" would that have made a difference in the way the young people thought about the president of our country? I don't know. But this incident continues to haunt me because it was one more time that I let my liberal sense of propriety keep me from engaging with those whose opinions so offend my values. Instead, I drove on. Today, I want to talk about values, our Unitarian Universalist values. To many of you, this might sound like a political rant, but I think it's important to explore why Unitarian Universalists, and indeed many progressive groups, go quiet in the face of a cruel remark or unforceful untruth, or a breathtaking statement of opinion from leaders we were taught to respect. And I want to suggest ways in which we might move toward a more perfect union. Throughout history, prophets have stood at the corner of church and state. Their calling is to speak truth to power, pass judgment on cultural and political norms, and to urge us to be better than we are. There has never been much reward in prophecy. No one wants to hear that the end is near and it's your fault. Through the ages, we've managed to rid ourselves of our public prophets through crucifixion, imprisonment, burning at the stake, or shooting them, or simply ignoring them. At the very least, a modern prophet who takes seriously the charge to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable risks losing their job. None of us comfortable people wish to be afflicted. There are, of course, exceptions. The Reverend Dr. William Barber, with his Moral Monday movement, is the first that comes to mind. But for the most part, we don't often speak to our moral outrage with much force or consistency. Why? Maybe one reason is that we don't want to be like them whose opinions are emotionally rooted. You know, those Christians whose voices seem to dominate the public square. But the liberal religious voices not only have a place in public discourse, it has an urgent responsibility to proclaim our liberal religious values. What do I mean by liberal religion? Well, it has two distinctive characteristics. The first is a posture of intentional engagement with modern culture. Generally, we try to live in the current age rather than pining for the good old days or the sweet by and by. The other characteristic of liberal religion is a commitment to free religious inquiry. We have open-ended and flexible faith commitments and are mostly comfortable with religious pluralism. Just look at our congregations. At any given time, we have people who claim their primary source of practice and/or inspiration as Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, humanism, paganism, or all of the above, or nothing much in particular. But because we are so adaptive to the culture and are relatively tolerant of pluralism, we face 5 dilemmas that affect our social justice work or prophetic practice in the public square. This morning, I'm going to unpack each one of them. Dilemma number one is that the theological tensions inherent in religious liberalism sometimes cause us to stumble over our best intentions. Traditionally, the prophet stands both inside and outside society. They straddle the corner of church and state. The problem is that cultural adaptation, the very trait that defines us as religious liberals, can easily lead to familiarity and comfort. It is difficult for someone from the social and economically privileged classes, like us. It's difficult for us to speak effectively on behalf of the poor and the powerless. We belong to the very establishment we are seeking to critique. So overturning the existing system would be contrary to our own individual and institutional interests. In other words, it's like asking us to chew off our own leg to be freed from a trap. The second dilemma that hinders our liberal prophetic practice is the ongoing debate about the proper role of religion in public square. We need to get past our prejudice that speaking religiously in public is something that proper Unitarian Universalists just don't do. We are almost hysterically concerned about appearing to proselytize, even though articulating our values without an attempt to convert someone else to our way of thinking, that's a far cry from proselytizing. So far, we've identified two factors that keep us relatively quiet in the public square: theological tension and pluralism, and our abhorrence of emotionalism and proselytizing. The third dilemma that affects our prophetic practice is the question, what does it mean to speak religiously? Now, this is a complicated question for us Unitarian Universalists because our vision of a just society, for example, is informed by many sources. But our religious convictions, however that is defined by an individual, they play a major role. Let me give you an example of the impact of speaking religiously. In 2013, Moral Mondays became a national news story. The Reverend Dr. William Barber had been laying the groundwork for a state-by-state movement that united Black, white, brown, rich and poor, employed and unemployed, gay and straight, documented and undocumented, religious and secular peoples, everyone. The purpose was to protest draconian laws and fear-mongering legislators. Reverend Barber's grounding was in Christian theology, specifically Psalm 94, which says, "Who rises up for me against the wicked? Who stands up for me against the evildoers? If the Lord had not been my help, my soul would soon have lived in the land of silence." Psalm 94. Barber linked secular policies with religious justifications, thereby deepening the arguments and most likely reaching a wider audience. At the very least, speaking religiously gives legislators an alternative religious perspective that counterbalances the arguments that religious conservatives have long been making. The fourth dilemma that affects liberal religious practice is the tension that emerges from our commitment to the separation of church and state. While Americans broadly agree that religious freedom is a good thing, we're truly at loggerheads on the extent to which religious groups should influence public policy. Our political and theological starting points affect our view about these difficult issues. For instance, I believe with all my heart on the separation of church and state, but I don't believe it's possible to leave your values aside while you go about the business of the state. We are hardwired to belong to a group of like-minded people, and our responses to authority are dictated by the type of parenting we receive in our very, very early years. In making decisions that affect large numbers of people, legislators could and should set aside their denominational affiliations, but it's very difficult to separate yourself from values instilled by both nature and nurture. This is kind of dense, so let's recap before we leave the reasons we go quiet in the face of loud emotional expressions of values not shared by us. Liberal religious voices have been ineffective in the public square because first, we seem wishy-washy. We hold various theological positions and we embrace pluralism. Second, we are mightily uncomfortable with emotionalism and proselytizing. Third, we don't agree on speaking about religion in public, perhaps hearkening back to the days where it was impolite to speak of religion and money. And fourth, we can't agree on the details of what it means to separate church and state. Now, although these four dilemmas are important, I think the fifth dilemma is the most immediate. That is the challenge of engaging in public prophetic practice under conditions of empire. Unlike the empires of the past, the American empire of the 21st century relies on indirect influence through various forms of pressure and intervention. America's empire's unwritten constitution sanctions vast public and private powers limited only by opportunity and ambition. To sustain the empire, it is necessary to keep citizens in a generalized feeling of insecurity and powerlessness. A generalized feeling of insecurity and powerlessness. Does that sound familiar? Add this to the mix of the tactics of sowing division between groups of people, and you have the cultural and political climate of 2022. So, where do we go from here? How will we move toward a more perfect union? First, we Unitarians, Universalists, need to clarify our religious identity. We cannot stand at the corner of church and state unless we have a clear understanding of why prophetic social justice work is religious work. The overarching principles of religious liberalism is rooted in a commitment to radical human equality. This was best articulated in Universalism's core theological insight. All humanity, indeed all of creation, is ultimately united in a common destiny. This is what Benjamin Rush believed and acted upon. As we identified who we are as Unitarian Universalists, we need to form alliances with other liberal religious groups. This means we need to get over our knee-jerk negative response to people calling themselves Christians. UU theologian James Luther Adams warned about confusing the teachings of Jesus with the teachings about Jesus. There's a difference. The teachings of Jesus are contained in the Jefferson Bible, or in some denominations, in the Red Letter Bible. These are words ascribed to Jesus of Nazareth, a historical figure condemned by the government for inciting public disorder and sentenced to death by crucifixion. Everything that follows are the teachings about Jesus. Christianity has been hijacked by those purporting to follow the teachings about Jesus. As shown in Benjamin Rush's letter to Thomas Jefferson in 1800, and on January 6, 2020, by those carrying signs conflating Jesus with the former president of the United States, there's nothing in the teachings of Jesus that would warrant a forceful overthrow of a government. Nothing. Each of the mainline Christian denominations have a liberal wing. In fact, the United Church of Christ is virtually indistinguishable from Unitarian Universalism. So much so that the joke goes that UCC stands for Unitarians Considering Christ. Some of these people from the mainline Christian denominations are now distinguishing themselves from the so-called Christians by identifying themselves as Jesus followers. The UU Christian Fellowship's tagline is freely following Jesus. Another thing we can do is respond with kindness and understanding to people yearning for the comfort of clarity about rules and the consequences breaking the rules brings. Who among us wouldn't like a little certainty in these unstable days? Now, granted, we may abhor the current set of rules, but at least we know where we stand. I think one of the reasons that so many of us are so frightened and unhappy is we thought that so many of the issues we fought for, abortion, marriage equality, voting rights, all those issues were settled. Now, imagine how frightened and unhappy people might be who see what they thought was settled: the primacy of white men, marriage between a man and a woman, the very definition of male and female, the inferiority of the other, the belief in the efficacy and pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps and the inevitable reward of hard work. All of that is being challenged. No wonder people are unhappy. Remember, to sustain the empire, it is necessary to keep citizens in a generalized feeling of insecurity and powerlessness. A third thing we can do is suggested by psychologists who study faulty thinking like confirmation bias and illusion of explanatory depth, and neuroscientists who confirm that people experience genuine pleasure, a rush of dopamine, when processing information that supports their beliefs. It feels good to stick to our guns, even if we are wrong, they observe. To counteract faulty thinking, or at least modify it, we might spend less time pontificating and more time trying to work through the implications of policy proposals. If we did that, maybe we'd realize how clueless we are, how complex issues are, and we might moderate our views. This, the researchers write, may be the only form of thinking that will shatter the illusion of explanatory depth and change people's attitudes. In this time and space, we need to take a deep breath and ground ourselves by remembering that the American impulse toward empire is only one side of the coin. The impulse toward democracy still beats. If we pay attention beyond the media-fed drumbeat of fear, we can see that the beat is getting stronger. We still question our leaders. We still emphasize ethics over doctrine in our commitment to justice. And we still succumb to what Cornel West calls a tragicomedy commitment to hope. These three factors, questioning, justice, and hope, are the spiritual wellsprings of a reinvigorated democracy and are also basic to religious liberalism. This is the message of healing and hope our prophetic social justice practice brings to the world. Now we need to carry that message out into the public square, to the corner of church and state. If you can't march, you can write. If you can't write, you can talk, you can listen, and certainly you can vote. and when we are scorned, threatened, or targeted, let us remember that we have a community in Unitarian Universalism where we can rest. We can bind up our wounds, we can tell our stories, and refresh each other with laughter and hope. May we have the bold courage to make it so. Amen.
Now join us with hymn number 159. This is also in the gray hymnal, or follow along in the video, and it's all 3 verses.
This is my song, of the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands are sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine. May truth and freedom come to every nation. May peace abound where strife has raged so long, that each may seek to love and live together. A world united, righting every wrong. A world united in its love for freedom, proclaiming peace together in one song.
In a dissenting opinion, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote that the court elevates one individual's interest in personal religious exercise over society's interest in protecting the separation between church and state. We find ourselves still and again standing at the corner of church and state. What message will be on our signs? What songs will we sing? Who will be our partners in our continuing struggle for a country of all the people? All the people. All the people. And for all the people. As we extinguish our chalice, let us resolve to find the courage to issue dissenting opinions when the occasion calls for dissent. Let us be gracious in voicing opinions with which we agree. And let us find the optimism to embrace questions, justice, and hope.
If I'm not mistaken, our exit song is one of our very dear favorite songs. Brings tears to my eyes.
Low below me, I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
Out.
A blue boat
Okay.
Thank you.